how he
We.
maneuvers. So how you maneuver out of the box settings because like in our meetings we think that we always have to do some optimization, right? And then Sunday, the product design head of product design at Kuda will take us on why and how they redesigned the Kuda app in 2022. So um, to cater for a broader audience than just the primary audience. All right. Yeah. First up is David. David, you have the floor.
Thank you.
Woo!
All right. Hi. Good morning or afternoon, everybody. Um. So yes, basically, this topic is centered around configuration management, right? Setups, DevOps, all of that stuff. So let's get into it. This is the agenda. Yeah. So my name is David. I am the lead software mechanic at CarryWise. My hobbies include reverse engineering things, TikTok, YouTube Shorts, Reels, all of that stuff, and cars of recent. Yeah, I am a retired rapper. I have some songs online. I will not tell you the link, by the way. I will never share it. Ah, no. Retired rapper, retired chef, and a retired mixologist. So yeah, so the concept of under the hood, right, as Dara mentioned, is about like giving an insight to how things work within different companies, especially within career-wise, and also within like our teams. So for people in like growth can know how we do things in engineering, and people in other companies can also know how we do things in career-wise engineering. And why this topic is largely due to the shege we have seen on the back end team and on the infrastructure team as a whole. And then we want to rant on some of those things to everyone. And the memory is still very fresh. So most of the things in this talk happened within the last 2-3 months, right? So it's still very fresh. So the idea of um, defaults is something that people just go for because multiple reasons actually. So first, they trust the manufacturer. They believe that, oh, this guy that created it probably knows what he's doing, and that's why he put that option as the default, right? Um, One of the theories around the default effect is that human beings are wired to avoid loss. So something is working, and you always click 1, 2, 3, and it works. You don't want to click one thing and to spoil. You just want it to work as it's working, and that's why there's that default option that always seems like the safest option, right? And evidence indicates that choice depends on the status quo or reference level. So I'll give an example to explain what this is saying. So let's assume you have a toy car, right? And you're fine with that, it's just working. And your friend comes with a toy truck, and then you like that too. So now you have two options. But then the toy truck comes with an option that you go blind in one eye. It's a wild option, I know, but let's use it as an example. And then you now consider, should I really go for this toy car? I might lose one eye. And then another friend comes and says, oh, I have this toy sports car, but then you might go blind in both eyes. And then you now start considering, now that you have multiple options, it looks like the more options you have, it should be like you have, more things to consider. You should have a better chance of getting something good. But then there's now this cognitive bias of, oh, what do I choose, and which is actually really better. And that's why that default exists, right? Just to help you, not stress your thinking level and what have you. Um, so now there's a story behind this. Who has installed Linux on a system before? Like personal desktop, installed Linux?
When did you
That's
install your Linux? Windows is everything. Yeah.
So okay, so my very first time, okay, not my first time, my second time installing Linux, right? I didn't know shit about Linux. It just looked like a fancy thing for developers to use, and I was just learning that time. And there was this thing where you could do an update, an upgrade, sorry, apt-get upgrade, and it upgrades your whole system. And it installs a new boot image. So, so all of these things you see here are boot images, right? This is version 4.4.0 then dash 142. Like they're all versions. I didn't know the difference. I just knew that anytime I updated, there was an option to keep or delete boot image. I always chose keep. And then it kept piling it up, right? And it happened that one day the update that I ran had a problem and this latest one could not work. And then I was stuck. What do I do? Do I go to recovery on the latest updates? Do I go back to a previous update? Or do I just do recovery on a previous update? So they're not like different options. My default, my safe haven of default is gone. I need to do something else. And I eventually solved it by formatting and reinstalling Linux. But yeah, look, I was in school. Forgive me. But yeah, so that default used to be then. I was always used to it. But then one day it didn't work and I needed to do something else. And that is what most of this talk is going to be about. So most developers know what they're doing. Apparently. Like, we think so. We think that because someone is the inventor of whatever library or whatever project, they should know what they're doing. Or there's a reason behind one particular default setting they put. But I will bust your brain a few times during this talk. So, there's an instance of MikroTik. MikroTik is a router for, so for example, your school, your like university would have this Wi-Fi across hostels and across departments that you could connect to. And then they are all on this MikroTik router that's across the whole the university's local area network. While I was, so I went to UI, by the way. While I was in UI, the router configuration was using the default settings, meaning that the admin login page had a username of admin and password of no password. Now, if you are an enterprising person like me, there's a lot of things you could do. One, you could change the login page of the Wi-Fi and direct everybody's username and password to your own computer. It's possible. I didn't say I did it. I just said it's possible. Right? And you can also just change the password and delete everything if you wanted to. And that's just because whoever set this up at the time just used the default settings. Oh, I should go back. But that's by the way. Who knows about CVEs? Cybersecurity exploits. Right. So WordPress and Drupal, they are very popular with CVEs, meaning that vulnerabilities come out on these things like daily, right? And there's this funny thing that WordPress does and Drupal also. I don't know if they still do it, but they used to do it a lot. So the first thing a hacker wants to do is know what version of WordPress you are using. And unfortunately for you, WordPress makes it easy by putting the version in a file. So if you go to any WordPress site and go to / I think it's readme.html, it will show the WordPress version and everything. Why they did that, I don't know, but it's just there by default. And then, like, somewhere in the fine print, they advise that you delete the file. But that's by the way. Drupal also has something similar. Then this other one is, the last one on this list is with the open ports or default passwords. Who remembers the WannaCry thing that happened in 2017? So it was a general thing. So Windows systems have this port that is open by default. I think it's 588 or 558. It's called Windows SMB. It's for file sharing, does it remove desktop as well? I'm not sure about that, but it's just an open port that's there. And some people realized that, oh, we could do something with it. We could send a payload to this computer and to accept it, and then we would lock it down until they send, I think it was $100, or was it more? Until they send a certain amount of crypto, and then it's unlocked. Happened in 2017. A similar thing happened in 2020 with SMB Ghost. SMB Ghost is just so there are two kinds of hackers, right? There are people that want to like, oh, take money and all of that stuff. And there are people that just want to see things scatter. And that was these people, right? SMB Ghost was a DDoS attack. So they would send like ridiculous amount of payloads to your systems and then it will crash. So now a lot of these things were created because it makes it easy for whoever is using these things to know what's going on with their systems. For example, when you set up MikroTik for the first time, right? They let you have that admin and no password in the beginning so that you can remember to change it. But some people do not remember to change it. And that is why we are where we are today. So, yeah, so the effects of this, right? I talked about some of this already. One of the important parts is number 2, that they can lead to legal consequences. We've had issues with Facebook and what was the other one? Was it Twitter? I can't remember. But then there's this thing where, oh, they got hacked and then there's a huge payout that's going to happen to users of the platforms. And they tell you to sign up somewhere and claim your dividends or whatever, right? So there are a lot of consequences of like insecure default configurations. So now to a case study that actually affects us or that we have actually experienced. So the first one is Nginx. So remember when I said that developers know what they're doing, right? Like we think they know what they're doing. Okay, so Nginx has like certain default configurations. So they have this thing where worker processes are set to auto, which means that it will create as many workers as CPU cores that you have. Yeah. So if you have 8 CPU cores, it will create 8 workers, which is cool. It's fine. I'm not even going to talk on that one. I'll just leave that. But I'll come to the next one, which is worker connections. The default value is set to 768. I checked the documentation. I asked ChatGPT, and I couldn't find a reason why it was 768. They only said that it seemed like a good number to put as the default worker connections. That was the only reason. It just seemed like a good number, and it's been there for a long time, right? And so we had an issue where one of our downstream services was timing out, and around that same period, we sent out a push notification. And how push notifications work is that once it goes out, for some reason, users think that's the right time to open the app, and then everybody tries to open the app, right? And because that downstream service was taking, I think like a second and a half, actually, it was just a second and a half, like 100, 1,200 milliseconds. Yeah, so that's a second and some decimals, right? And because it was taking that little time, right, the number of worker connections got maxed out. So we have like 10,000 transactions per minute going on, and then we have 768 worker connections. So you just imagine how that is going to, interfere with each other. And when I and Raman, the other engineering lead, we were looking at what was going on, right? The first thing that comes to mind is, when you have a spike in traffic, scale out your servers, right? Add more servers. Let's handle the traffic. And then you add the servers and you realize that it's not really solving the problem. Only to go and check this config and realize that it was set to 768 by default. And somehow we never thought to check it. We just felt like Nginx probably know what they're doing. And here we are. The third one is access logs. Now, depending on how much traffic your site receives, this access log can get very full, very, very fast. And by default, Nginx does not have anything like cleaning up logs or whatever. So if you deploy something for a client, if there's a freelancer, right, and you just have this turned on, you would end up building up gigabytes of logs that you might not even use. But then it's turned on by default because they know what they are doing. But yeah, this was what I was talking about, right? So this default setting should work for most people. But then how would you know when it doesn't work for you anymore? And how would you know what to do after that? Let's go to the second case study. One of the most interesting ones, MongoDB Atlas. Who knows MongoDB here? I mean, come on. But yeah, so MongoDB Atlas is the cloud service of MongoDB. So if you don't want to install it on your own servers, pay them some money and they will set it up for you. So what did Mongo do to us? So based on our workload, we didn't want to have just one fixed server size. We want that, or when there's high throughput or high traffic, let's scale up. And when the traffic reduces, let's scale down. Now, see the problem. Scaling up uses the average CPU usage in the last 1 hour. But scaling down uses the last 24 hours. And you can't change this. And we felt like, okay, it's fine. Like, let's see how much this is going to cost us eventually. And now, because of how our workload is, or how our tasks run, during the day, we don't have so much traffic, or we don't have so much data entry MongoDB. But during the night, where we have periodic tasks running, when we have the periodic tasks running, that's automated charging, returns generation, all of that stuff, we have like more things happening from that 12 to like 5 a.m. And so this usage goes like this, and then it goes up, and then just goes down. So this scale down would never happen because in 24 hours would exceed this 50%. And that was just going on continuously. And then the second part was with the backups. And this was a very beautiful one because it cannot be disabled for whatever reason. You can only change this setting, but it can't be disabled. So look at this. And I'll explain what MongoDB's pricing is so that it will make sense. So MongoDB charges you for how much data you store for how long. So it's not a fixed rate of, you create that's for backups actually. So it's not a fixed rate of you have a 1 terabyte storage and they charge you for that per month. No, they charge you for what you store and for how long you store it. And okay, for context, the kind of data we store in MongoDB are not transactional data. It is event data, analytics data, and other stuff that is moved to our data warehouse eventually. So we would never need to restore a backup from 1 month ago, but they keep that backup for 1 year. So every month, or let me start from every hour. For every hour, they are generating 200 gig worth of backups for us. And they're doing that every 6 hours. And they store that 200 gig for 2 days. So this is the calculation. There are 4 6 hours in a day, right? Yeah. So they're storing 4 times 200, 800 gig of data for 2 days, and then delete that after the 2 days. But they will charge us for that storage regardless. The next is that they are storing 200 gig for 1 week. So now storing for 2 days is cheaper than storing for 1 week, right? But then at the end of the day, it's deleted because that's the retention period, 1 week. Same thing for weekly, monthly, and then the yearly one was even the ridiculous one because I saw backups from 2021 that I didn't even know existed. What did they will charge you for it? And it can't be disabled. And that's just the default, right? You can only change. I think the hourly one was the compulsory one, but then you have to have 1 hourly and then 1 other one. And it can't be disabled. But yeah, the state of this, man. So how did we maneuver these issues, which is pretty much the core of this talk? But before I continue, does anyone have any question? Yeah. So let me continue. So, mitigating risk and best practices. So the first and the most important part is observability. This can be a whole talk on its own, right? But I'll just break it down. If you do not know what's going on within your systems, you do not know, you won't know if anything is wrong. You won't know if you need to change anything. Basically, if you don't have insight to what is going on with your system, you can't know how to fix any of these things, right? I have something here, right? When your worker connections are, when your worker connections are maxing out, how would you know that? When would you know to increase this number? Where would you know to scale horizontally or vertically, as the case may be, right? And that's what observability does for you. So now, they call them three pillars: logs, traces, and metrics. Logs are basically just text records of things that happen in your system. So logs can be written manually or they can be generated by a service. So for example, Nginx has its own logs, right? And then traces are more of, by the way, everything, traces and metrics are all logs because it's just how you visualize it that are different, right? So traces is like a view of how a transaction goes through your services. So if I should have put the screenshot of that. So if, for example, you have a service that is responsible for handling withdrawals, a trace will show you the point from where the user initiated withdrawal, the point from where it sent it to the gateway, the point of where it sent it back to your own service, all of that stuff. That's what traces do. So if you have that that degradation of a downstream service timing out, right, it's from the trace that you most likely see that first. And then the last is metrics. Metrics are basically status. They are basically indicators of how your system is performing. So if you have things like your CPU usage, memory usage, what else, disk space, all of that, you get that from metrics. And another important part is load testing, using tools like K6 and Apache Bench. So when you want to, while you are setting something like this up, right, and you want to know beforehand how much request this would handle, right, that's when load testing comes in. I remember when I was deploying the authentication service, right, I used this tool and I ran, I think, 10,000 requests just to see like how well it will hold up and to see if I needed to like tune the Nginx or UAC settings, right? And case 6 was like really, really helpful. Now, this next one is regular updates and patch management. So most applications like come with this by default, and they just install the updates for you. But then some do not, and then you have to like check for updates and all of that. This is actually very helpful when dealing with defaults, because you find out that some, for example, WordPress might have a vulnerability in version 4.7 and it was fixed in version 4.8, right? You would need to regularly update your update your services and your applications to handle stuff like that. Always check documentation for fine print. So it turns out that when I was setting up MongoDB, right, all of this was in the documentation about the backups and auto scaling. But I didn't read it. But the funny thing is that even if I had read it, I would have still just accepted it because it worked, right? And it was only after I began to see, what was going on with how they were charging us and all of that stuff, that I realized that, I should have actually looked at this thing deeply, right? So yeah, always consult documentation. Conduct regular security audits. Fun fact, your firewall on your MacBook is turned off by default. I don't know why, but if you are a normal user, right, you shouldn't have any problem. But if you're like me, that you install things all the time, from different sources, then you should probably turn it on. Right? Did someone say something? Yeah, you should probably turn it on if you always install stuff from unknown sources. So Mac or Apple says that their setup of allow incoming connections or disallow incoming connections like should fix that for you, and you shouldn't have any issue with malware. But then if you're like me that installs a lot, you should check that out. So conduct regular security audits, both on your personal systems, your phones, your servers. Just check. There's a tool that checks your binary files. I can't remember the name right now, but if I do, I'll mention it. Thank you very much.